So over the course of this season, we have really focused on talking about Boise. We've delved into our community. We've listened to stories about how Boise has transformed, expanded, diversified, and changed. During the last few presentations, we heard about the history of Asian immigrants and their descendants and how they shaped the history and culture of our community. At our last forum, we talked about the relationship between housing and the notions of home and how those have changed over time and how those relationships affect the look and feel of our neighborhoods. Our very first talk this season was about Shoshone-Bannock women and how misunderstandings and misrepresentations of 19th century women reverberate down to the present. Each one of our forums has begun with an important acknowledgement that I'll do right now as well. And that is that we are gathered today, this evening, on the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territories of the Shoshone-Bannock and Northern Paiute people in the Boise Valley. All of these stories that we speak to, or that we've been speaking about, have really looked at what we try to accomplish with this season's Fettuccine Forum, and that is, let's talk about Boise. It's important for us to recognize and understand that there has been a long interplay of human and environmental forces that have shaped this community for centuries. They are still at work, and they will influence our common interests in the future that we envision to come. With that introduction, it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Karl Brooks. He's returning to his hometown, which is evident by the audience tonight. He has lots of friends here. He is here tonight from the University of Kansas, where he teaches courses in history, public administration, and law and society. While he lived here in Boise, Dr. Brooks was the director of the Idaho Conservation League and served 3 terms in the Idaho State Senate. He represented Southeast Boise and the Central Bench. He moved to Kansas to pursue his Ph.D. in history and later served as a political appointee, a senior political appointee in the Obama administration with the Environmental Protection Agency. Tonight, Dr. Brooks is going to treat us to a talk about 150 years of Boise's environmental history and how the unique challenges of the natural landscape here helped foster some powerful and unusual community alliances, resulting in landmark environmental and conservation movements that have really come to define our community. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Karl Brooks.
Hey, thanks so much. It's really great to see everybody here tonight. I haven't faced down a Boise audience in about 25 years, and you guys look like you're going to be a really forgiving and really curious audience. So I think I should be okay with that. I want to follow on Jennifer's thanks by thanking the folks on her staff who put this together. That's a great team who worked with Jennifer in the Arts and History Department. And I want to thank each of you and everybody online for changing up your calendar. This was originally scheduled, I think, back in February. We moved it to April, and I really appreciate everybody making that accommodation. Mary and I really appreciate it so much because I was really hopeful that we could be here with you, and April worked a lot better. We are really grateful that so many good friends and family are here. I'm not going to name you all because there's way too many of that both here and online. But this is kind of like a classic Boise evening, and it's really good training for my 50th high school reunion, Mary, which will be in about 3 months from now. So get your practice in on that. So I'm going to talk tonight about connections, some of which are unexpected. And there are 2 of them that sort of made this evening happen tonight. I like to come back here in the summer, and I like to hang out with some friends, and I like to drink a few beers in the summer in the evening here. So I was walking back last summer from the Boise River, where I like to jump in once each year and take a dip in the Boise River. And I'm walking back to the north end up River Street. And I noticed that one of the classic homes that I remember from River Street is now a historic site, and it's being interpreted so people understand more about the long history of Black Boiseans. And I think, right on, that is so great that Boise's taken advantage of this opportunity to teach about history. So I get back to Lawrence, and I just send basically a blind note to the city of Boise saying, hey, great job on the Heyman House there on River Street. Well, who should reply but Jennifer Stevens? I had no idea that Jennifer had left what she used to do, which is academic history, where I first met her as Dr. Stevens from Cal Davis, and she was now the director of arts and history for Boise. So that unexpected connection had a lot to do with her and Mayor McLean inviting me to talk tonight. which I got to say is a tremendous honor for me to be invited back here to my hometown to share some ideas about the city of Boise and my experiences in Boise. So there's a second unexpected connection with Mayor McLean. Both of us have served on what I like to call the thin green line. The thin green line are the people who dedicate themselves, heart and soul, to environmental protection. They work for EPA, which I had the honor to work for. They work for cities, they work for tribes, they work for states. These are people who bust their ass every single day to try to make sure that the natural environment all of us depend upon has guardians, has protection, and has the respect that it deserves. So the connection is Mayor McLean and I both work for Idaho Conservation League. I was there before her, and that's too bad for me because it's clear that I could have learned a lot from Mayor McLean by just watching her at work. She has advanced the conservation mission in this valley and in this state way further than I did in my brief time at ICL. So it is an honor, as an old foothills guy especially, to thank her and commend her and so many other Boiseans for the work that all of them and you have done preserving those foothills of Boise, which is why I want to tip my Boise Hawks cap to Mayor McLean and everybody who did something to make sure that the foothills are part of Boise history. So, big congrats to Mayor McLean, as you all know, was the first woman ever elected to be mayor of Boise. It's about damn time after 160 years that Boise has a woman who is mayor. Mayor McLean joins a long list of eminent Idaho women pioneers. One of them was the first Idaho woman elected to the Congress, Gracie Post, tough North Idahoan. You may not remember her much. She got elected nearly 75 years ago to the Congress. She had the best name ever in Idaho politics, Hell's Bell. If you want to know why Gracie was called Hell's Bell, buy my book about Hell's Canyon. University of Washington Press will thank you for that very much. 4 years after Representative Post made history, another eminent Idaho woman joined that list. On the same day that young Frank Church was sworn in as a United States Senator, the youngest United States Senator in the 20th century, back in 1956, his wife, Bethine, herself only 31, essentially became Idaho's third senator. Those of us fortunate enough to work for the senator always knew Idaho was the luckiest state in the country because we had 3 U.S. senators. Bethine earned that reputation. She was a powerhouse and a force of nature. So Boise, like every place, has an environmental history, and every environmental history starts in some real place. This history about edges and connections is no different. Family and friends started me thinking about edges and connections in Boise long before I ever thought, maybe I should go be a historian. And they didn't even know that they were training me. Here's what I mean. Let's start with edges. My family, for example, we always lived along the edges of Boise. We lived on the north edges of Boise. Then there are those sort of emotional edges. Those of you who had the pleasure to know me from about 1970 on, when my hair got longer and my patience got shorter, knew that I was capable of some pretty edgy bullshit back in those days. And I am so grateful that family and friends managed to move me past all of that and put up with me and my behaviors. Now, connections. Friends here and family here, along the river, in the mountains, in the hills, formed connections that have shaped me as a Boisean my entire life. And for that, I am grateful. It's what makes me say, proud to be a Boisean born, proud to be a Boisean bred. And whether you are a native here or a newcomer here, that feeling of being part of this community is something that's really special about this town. And I'm going to try to share some ideas about what makes it so special. Like I say, foothills kid from way back. I first remember the foothills living over in East Boise, a little house about a 5-minute walk from Adams, just below Castle Rock. We could hike up there and we could spy down into the old pen from a little cave that was just along the ridge. At that time, I thought foothills, wow, this is kind of cool. And I just basically spent the rest of my life living along the foothills. Before 4th grade, we moved up to Boise Heights. And that was the place where I spent most of the rest of my time living in Boise. The school that I attended, Old Central Grade School. Some of you may have had the pleasure of going to Old Central as it was 7th and Franklin. If you walk by that state parking lot that's been there for 50 some years now, sing "Hail Bulldogs, Gone but Not Forgotten." We were the Central Bulldogs, and that school disappeared after the 1972 school year. That was good old Central. And sorry, go back and take a look at that. Very cool structure. If you go by and look at either Washington or Roosevelt or Longfellow, they were similar designs. That was the way we built grade schools back in the early part of the 20th century. Anyway, I'm a proud Central Bulldog, and I know there's some others of you here in the crowd. So for 15 years, living in the foothills, my buds and I roamed up and down those places. We chased model rockets, we chased lizards. I must have brought home 10,000 cheatgrass stickers in my white tube socks, and my mom removed every single one of them. But those were souvenirs of a life spent in the foothills. So coming back to Boise, have you ever felt this way? 1997, I'm back here for the first time after moving to Lawrence. It's the winter. I stand outside, I look up at the foothills. The sun is coming up, it's glowing on the snow up there, it's pink. I can see through the trees up to the foothills. It's about 5,000 feet, well, I guess about 3,000 feet above Boise. To get to Bogus Basin, you climb more in 16 miles than you travel uphill in Kansas from Lawrence to the Colorado border, which is 448 miles. So I'm looking up through the trees at the hills in the snow. What's my next line? Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. So I went to college back east, and those gullible city slickers, believe me when I said that I could walk out my front door. This is how isolated they thought Idaho was. I could walk out my front door and I could walk true north all the way to the Canadian border and never touch another town. And they believed me. I'm sorry, Koosky and Smelterville. I got that wrong, because if you do draw a north latitude line right out my door, you run through both Koosky and Smelterville. But who knew that from New Jersey? Nobody knew that. So my larger point then was, I think, true, and it's still true now. Whether you're a multi-generation native or new to this city, we all walk our own true north. That's the mental longitude line that we run up from the river, through the foothills, past Bogus Basin, through the trees, and on into the mountains as far as our dreams will take us. So let's follow Boise's true north here. We'll start along the river. That's the riparian corridor of trees that gave the city its name. Imagine after 250 miles of hoofing it over lava desert from Fort Hall to the Boise Valley and seeing those trees. No wonder they shouted, "Les bois, voyez les bois," trees. That's the place where Boise's true north starts, is along that river. So now let's climb up from the river into the arid foothills that cover the northern part of the city, and let's pause and look back down. To the east, it's desert. To the south, it's desert. To the west, it was desert, and then it became irrigated croplands. It's now cities in their own right. It's Meridian, it's Nampa, it's Caldwell. It's kind of amazing to me that more people live in Meridian or Nampa today than lived in Boise when we graduated high school in 1974. Treasure Valley's population today exceeds Idaho's when I graduated high school. That is a mark that a lot of places would say, how did you do that? Well, I'm going to try to share some ideas about how our environmental position and these environmental connections and features help explain some of that remarkable rise to fame and fortune. So back on our little jaunt going true north. Where the foothills transition to tree line sits Bogus Basin. And beyond that, 425 miles of mountains all the way to the Canadian border. This little sort of mental imaginary jaunt that we just took going true north connects the three distinctive environmental features that have defined Boise's history. The life-giving water of the river, our arid valley, and those forested mountains stretching north. Those connections that we just made in our imaginary trip, Boiseans have been making those connections since the Civil War. Connecting natural features shaped Boise's environmental history. Building alliances that connected those features made Boise's political history. I'm also going to suggest that some of those unexpected alliances that shaped Boise's environmental history can also position this city to meet challenges going forward. So this talk will have a little bit of a forward look as well as a typical historian rearview mirror look to it. So I'm going to talk about environmental politics in Boise. Do I have any experience in that? Yes, just a little bit. For me, the politics were prehistoric. As a teenager and as a young adult, real Idaho heroes inspired me. Frank Church and Cecil Andrus, don't need to introduce those two guys, but they set amazing standards for those of us who were privileged enough to grow up when they were on the Idaho and national stage. Both as heroes and as my mentors, they inspired us to believe that good things and even great things could be done. Frank Church showed me that if you had the brains and the courage, you could move a nation. Cecil Andrus taught what I thought was a hard but practical lesson. You often achieve the remarkable by aiming every single day at the most important. And I think that's why both of those gentlemen are still remembered for the heroes that they were in Idaho. In politics, you pick your spots and you take your chances. In 1986, I knocked off an incumbent state senator and I went to the Idaho legislature. I went into the Senate chamber where I had never been in my life until I went to take the oath in December 1986. And then I started learning how Idaho environmental politics were going to operate. Not long after that, one of my colleagues from across the aisle, a rural legislator, said to me, "Your yuppies really gripe me." Your yuppies? He's talking about 40,000 of my neighbors in Southeast Boise and the Central Bench. I knew right then that I was going to be learning some tough lessons about Idaho politics. We did score some big environmental wins, especially with Governor Andrus in the governor's office. One of the ones that I'm proudest of in 1988, the state set aside to protect against hydroelectric development on our undammed rivers in Idaho, including the Payette River. I'm very proud of that. And yet the very next year, we took some losses. The very next year, some of the same rural legislators who had been my allies on protecting rivers turned around and gerrymandered the Fish and Game Commission. They gave rural Idahoans substantially more influence over wildlife and fishing and hunting policy than my neighbors, the Idaho majority, those yuppies that I represented. And the gerrymandering happened for only one reason: to dilute the voice of city folks. It was quite plain what was going on there. This anti-urban, anti-environmental legislative backlash became tectonic by the mid-1990s. Over the next quarter century, it has reshaped Idaho politics. Stunning but true fact if you're new around here. In 1990, Idahoans elected as many Democrats as Republicans to the state Senate. The very next year, when reapportionment happened, rural Democrats from northern Idaho and eastern Idaho partnered up with Republicans to draw a map that essentially condemned the Democratic Party to permanent minority status in the legislature. That short-sighted deal has meant for 30 years now that Idaho has essentially been a one-party state in the legislature. Within a couple election cycles, even the seats held by those Democrats who cut that short-sighted deal turned Republican and have never turned back the other way. 1992, I retired from the Senate and I went to work for Idaho Conservation League. That's the place where I really saw environmental politics turning into something more than just traditional Republican versus Democrat. I mean, that had been going on since 1970 when Cecil Andrus showed up as governor here. It was taking on a more ominous shape. By the mid-90s, whether you're up in North Idaho forests or out on the Snake Plain talking to farm people, you recognize that customary conservatism was metastasizing. Now, big money in Idaho politics had always flowed to small government conservatives. No surprise about that, but it was now finding and funding a new ally: anti-urban cultural reaction. This new alliance drove politics from the early 2000s on. It's produced the Idaho that too often makes the news for the wrong reasons. It's the Idaho that too many other Americans see when they watch news about Idaho. Now, I've lived in the American heartland for a long, long time, and I think this geographical perspective might reassure you or it might distress you. Idaho's not alone. So I live now in the middle of those semi-rectangular states in the heartland of America: Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. In 2010, President Obama appointed me the regional administrator for Region 7. We're known as Region 7 out there. That's where the world's agricultural engine is driven and fueled. Big money has always known how to get their phone calls returned in Topeka, Jeff City, Des Moines, and Lincoln. That's a guy who took on the job at Region 7. So I was the Heartland honcho for 5 years there, 2010 to 2015. I drove thousands of miles through a part of America that most of you fly over or drive through just as fast as you can. That was my beat for 5 years. And I tasted in that job the toxicity that has polluted so many conversations about land, water, and society in America. I can't count how often I heard at whoops-a-daisy, something happened to the PowerPoint, sir. Oh, there we go. There we go. I can't count how often I heard in that job, EPA and Obama are job killers. They're out to shut down American agriculture. They must hate rural people. That's me listening to somebody shouting that at me in a high school gym. We must have been pretty busy because apparently we were also out after small towns and hardworking rural people too. I never got death threats, but I was called job killer from Ottumwa to Ogallala and from Poplar Bluff to Cedar Rapids. Like most federal agencies, we took the logo off our vehicles after a while. And I think that's probably true in much of the rural West too, is that federal agencies that work in rural areas have taken their agency logos off the vehicles. I wonder why. Environmental politics where we live now sounds a lot like where you live. One-party legislative supermajorities in all 4 states, monochromatic congressional delegations, environmental slogans that may sound familiar to you. Resist federal tyranny. Screw those coastal elites. Hands off my property. Freedom, baby, freedom. So yeah, I've experienced a couple sources of environmental politics. Now, environmental history. What qualifies me to talk about environmental history? When I left here to go study for a PhD in history, I went to work with this guy, Donald Worster, at the University of Kansas. Dr. Worster, Don I like to call him, essentially helped invent the field of environmental history nearly 45 years ago. He was as tough a disciplinarian and taskmaster as C. Sanders in his own way. I would advise you and recommend you read any of Don's writings. He's written about a dozen books, probably 40, 50 articles. Any one of them will reward your reading. He's that smart, he's that thoughtful, he's that eloquent, and he is just right on in so many things that he does. Here's the basic point about environmental history. People do stuff we call history, sure thing, but people don't live in a bubble. And we don't live on paper. We're biological animals. We're like mice, just bigger, or like elk, just supposedly smarter. We live amid and we depend upon natural features and forces, like snowmelt coming off the hills, or like arid foothills that tumble down into a river valley. No more than mice or elk, no more than chukars or cheatgrass can we deny things like photosynthesis and lightning fires. Boise is remarkable. You guys are economic dynamos. This building here kind of testifies to that. I think I read recently that Micron and Meta have committed another, is it $16 billion to investments in this valley? I mean, you guys are world beaters economically, and you're heroes culturally too. You got your own HGTV show. How amazing is that? You're famous in your own time, but you share space with other history makers. The river, the foothills, the mountains to our true north. They are sitting at every conference table where you think you're designing your better Boise. They are mute but mighty, and they shape the choices that you make. They reshuffle the cards that you privilege yourself in thinking that you alone are playing. Boise, Boston, Bahrain, it doesn't matter. Every place has its environmental history. People connected Boise's natural features one way at one time to use them for one purpose, and then when new needs arose, they connected them for different purposes. And each time they built political alliances to make those environmental connections. Everybody should know Idaho's state motto. Somebody want to shout it out? Esto perpetua, may she go on forever. It's not just dusty Latin, it's Boise's lived reality, this conversation that happens 24/7, 365 between the natural world and us. That's the reality of Esto perpetua. Since before the Civil War, Boise's environmental history has unfolded in phases. Each phase reflects new connections along the edges between our distinctive natural features: aridity, topography, and water. Boise's modern environmental history, and understand, thank you to Jennifer for acknowledging that we reside on property that was other people's long before ours, but Boise has a modern environmental history. I think it starts at the Oregon Trail, the 1840s. Those immigrants stagger down off the mountain home desert into the Boise Valley. If you've ever walked the old road, it's pretty cool to see. Boise and the river was for them sustenance and a place of survival, and it was a damn sight better than about 100 other overnight camp spots between St. Joe, Missouri and the Willamette Valley. Because the trail connected aridity to water, Boise became a substantial, settled place. That, I think, is the beginning of these connections between aridity and water. Then Boise environmental history swerves in about 1865. Okay, come back at me. Think Deadwood, except with a real sheriff. This is Orlando Rube Robbins. He was lost south of the Salmon River in the 1860s. That's when boomers discover that the Boise River tributaries just up over the hills are filled with gold. This is the next great mining boom frontier after Northern California and the Denver Rocky Mountain front. Thousands of people flock in here looking for that elusive gold. And they follow up from the river through the foothills into the forested hills and the tributaries of the Boise River, where they work in mines under the ground and where they also tap the Boise River tributaries to run hydraulic mining operations, which have the effect essentially of tearing the mountains apart to get at the gold. So the Boise River is now connecting them to the area where they mine, and the roads are taking them up through the hills into the mountains. So they've created a new series of connections, but they've also renewed one of the oldest ties in humanity between the hustler and the hustled. Just think Bogus Basin. I'll get back there in a little bit. Boiseans remake their history again. After the 1880s, the railroad comes through the valley. We're now linked to markets east and west. We can begin to produce things that can easily reach much bigger populations east of us and west of us. So Boiseans shift their environmental center of gravity downhill from mountain gold to irrigated crops. Economics, culture, and politics follow the water. They always do. During the 4 decades around World War I, Boise investors, bankers, and farmers build new political alliances for a new mission. They need Eastern money and government technology to figure out how to tap that river to become irrigation water to grow crops. It's an irrigation crusade, and it works. Water connects Boise to the river. It connects the land around Boise to the river. It connects Ada County to Canyon County economically. And that political alliance that drew in that capital and that government expertise transforms sagebrush downstream from us into the crops that will support southwestern Idaho agriculture. Soon, boomers are calling it the Treasure Valley, where before it was acres of sagebrush all the way to the rim of the Snake River. During the first half of the 20th century, Boise Basin still mines a little bit of gold, but the city's focus has become serving that environmental irrigation enterprise. managing it, securing financing for it, helping make the laws that regulate it. So from supplying and financing mines to managing water, Boise has shifted its environmental focus. Breidenbach Canal, Diversion Dam, New York Canal, Arrow Rock Dam. They're part of Boise's life. They have been now for 125 years in some cases. Upstream, Anderson Ranch will nearly be 75 this year, I think. Those dams and canals are more than concrete and rockfall artifacts. They are active historic agents shaping Boise's history even today. Raise your hand if you've ever swam, sailed, boated, quaffed, or just lazed along any one of those water features here. I want to see every hand grow up because that's what we do in Boise. We use those water features. They are signatures of Boise. The dams and the canals that manage that water don't just hold water, though. They make law. They cement and keep in business political alliances. The law firm I used to work for had a lot to do with managing connections between private investors, irrigation companies, and federal and state agencies. They change us, and they keep changing us, and they change our ideas about water and what water should be and what water should do. Just watch. Dams and canals that are built for one purpose, to deliver irrigation water, begin to do something very different. And alliances formed for one purpose shift to pursue different goals. So by the mid-1960s, farmland along the Boise River has come into cultivation, and much farmland in Canyon County is also under cultivation. Lucky Peak goes in 1955, 56. I'd recommend, if you're interested in knowing what about Lucky Peak, Susan Stacy wrote a wonderful book about the political and administrative history that brought us that dam. That I hope it still says Keep Forest Green. Is that still up there? Still painted green every spring? Rock on. That's great. So the river's uses are beginning to change because Lucky Peak slows spring flood flows. The river becomes a place where a little college is starting to straggle along the banks of the river. Subdivisions are being built above the Broadway Bridge and below Plantation Golf Course. And with the right connections between water and city, the river that once restricted urbanization because of floods becomes a new economic and aesthetic opportunity. Investors, lenders, builders who had mobilized to get Lucky Peak find new allies. Their goal, make that water earn money for Boiseans. It's a classic Boise position. Why should Canyon County get all the benefits? What about us here in Boise? And so water that irrigated crops becomes water that supports riverside activity. Once the river is managed through town, the origin of the Greenbelt happens in the late 60s and early 70s. Today, I was over at City Hall. I met with Jennifer and Mayor McLean. If you look at the plaque from the building of City Hall, 1976, there's members of the city council on there. Many of their names are forgotten now. Those people came from a whole variety of different backgrounds. There were realtors, contractors, bankers, good citizens. Those folks had the vision to think, hey, maybe the Boise River banks can be something other than a place to dump car bodies and throw trash. This is what we have now, what you have now. I still say we sometimes, even though I haven't lived here for a good long time. The Greenbelt begins to emerge because the river is now capable of supporting construction and residential and recreational activity along the side. Once you get rid of the trash dumps and the car bodies, you can start building homes. Once the river doesn't flood every spring, you can start building office parks along there. Boiseans begin creating a new kind of riverside after 1970 to 72. The urban riparian zone, in turn, shapes lifestyles, it shapes culture, it shapes the whole meaning of down by the river. Take this amazing facility. About 1971, 72, my friends and I, and I'm looking at some of them, would never have been down here at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. This was a tired, old, working neighborhood. The river, what about the river? By that time, though, the Greenbelt was taking shape. We were early adopters of the Greenbelt lifestyle. We were finding all kinds of interesting places along the river where you could enjoy yourself. We were early recognizing that the cultural meaning of being along the river was changing because of our different management of the river. So that's one kind of change that happens with connecting us in new ways to these natural features and the unexpected alliances from irrigation support to construction and residential development and city building and opportunities to enjoy the river as an environmental resource. There will be another reconnection happening too, connecting these features in unexpected ways. The catalyst for that connection? World War II. So, Bogus Basin, which I like to think of as Boise's Diamond Crown. There's a wonderful book, and the author's here in the audience, The History of Bogus Basin. Each of you should pick it up. It's not just a beautiful coffee table book, it's some darn fine history too. Eve Chandler's out in the audience there. But Boise's ski area has a backstory. It signifies us, but it has its own backstory about unexpected connections. So in 1942, the United States Army Air Force identifies Gowan Field as one of the principal training bases for America's heavy bombers. Within 12 months, 5,000 young men pour into Boise, and hundreds of civilians help them do that work, including my maternal grandfather, a Dust Bowl refugee from Missouri. He's trained as a machinist and goes to work on some of the engines out there. So all these people are now in Boise. Boiseans love the federal cash. I mean, military investment brings real cash in the aftermath of the Depression. But people dread what I'll call war's social consequences. Imagine thousands of these young guys, many of whom know by the time they reach this point in their training that they will die. The 8th Army Air Force lost more people than the Marines did in World War II. But they're here in Boise, sometimes for as long as 4 or 5 months. How are you going to get them out of town on weekends and keep them away from our daughters? The solution that a couple of colonels at Gowan Field and a couple of businessmen in town come up with, including my paternal grandfather, Paul Brooks, is we need a ski area. Remember that abandoned work camp up there that was for a while training young men to do something during the Depression? Remember that gold strike that never happened? We still call it Bogus Basin. I got the idea we might be able to figure out a way to get those guys out of town up on the hill. And sure as the world, by 1943, I think, Eve, right? The ski area is going. 42, the ski area is up and running. The Army is crucial to this. Up that narrow gravel road, Army 4x4s are hauling flyers and civilians. My aunt among them, she's a Boise High School sophomore at this point. She reported that the trip up was as much fun as the skiing was because she got to sit in the back with a bunch of really glamorous flyers from all over the United States. She literally said Bogus Basin was my dreamland of World War II. I just had a dreamland experience. So that's where it came from. Then the war ends and the flyers go home, but Bogus Basin remains. 75 years later, this community jewel remains one of the signature points of Boise. It connects the valley, the foothills, and the forested mountains. For Boiseans, Meridianites, Eagletonians, Mountain Homers, Caldwellians, I'm not sure there are Caldwellians, but all of us who have lived in the valley have been shaped by the presence of that ski area there. Who would have thunk that a wartime social hygiene expedient would turn out to be one of Boise's most significant environmental connections to the foothills and the mountains above? Let's see, I think there's at least 5 local governments involved in managing Bogus, 2 higher ed institutions, dozens of school districts, hundreds of businesses, not to mention thousands of people who love to go up there. Those connections have shaped Boise. So Bogus and the Greenbelt, that's environmental opportunity at work. People innovating, people building alliances, people connecting Boise's environmental features. Boise people connect like nobody's business. Been doing that for about 165 years, and you better not be done. For all of Boise's magic, this city faces a hell of an environmental challenge. Climate change will test this valley in ways that it has not been tested before. I think, though, that some of these experiences and some of these environmental features and edges can help Boise deal with and anticipate what climate change will do and say to this valley. So I'm now going to peer ahead just a little bit into Boise's future. Historians are not supposed to do that. We are trained to turn those questions away and say, we don't look forward. We're trained to look in the rearview mirror. But I'm a politician by genes and training, so I'm going to speculate just a little bit. And my speculation is going to have a real sunny side up to it, and it's going to have a little bit of a hard-boiled side to it. But here's the sunny side up. Boise's political and cultural and economic dynamism will create unexpected new alliances that will meet this new challenge of confronting climate change. Now, here's the hard-boiled side. These new alliances will provoke opposition, and they will incite adversaries. Some of them will be close to home, others will be across the state. Why? Same two reasons I mentioned earlier. Politically speaking, many people in Idaho do not appreciate Boise's political clout. They never have, and they certainly don't now. Secondarily, that cultural reaction I talked about. Boise represents a vision of a kind of Idaho that a lot of people in the state apparently are bitterly opposed to. I have no solutions for that. It's you guys who are going to have to figure that part of it out. But I think the other part, that political part, I think you can outflank that by the kind of alliance building that helped the irrigation crusade triumph, that created a green belt out of a scraggly riverbank and helped build Bogus Basin. Because Boise, for at least 130 years, has had allies from Twin Falls to Payette. What lifts Boise's boat lifts hundreds of thousands of other boats around this state. Climate change will be the supreme environmental challenge for Boise. Here's the fact. Boise is surrounded by deserts. Even the foothills are arid foothills. They explode with fire when lightning strikes at the wrong time. You're super vulnerable to diminishing snowfall. All the water that flows down the Boise system, it's all snowfall. As snowy winters get less frequent, as snow comes later and leaves earlier, snowpack drops, water flow drops, irrigation is harder, power generation is more expensive, critters die, fish don't reproduce. And the risks continue to multiply. Winter forage for deer and elk dwindles, and summers in Boise, which are already, as you know, verging at times on intolerable, become ever more so. And not everybody can escape to McCall and Cascade, and even they face their own climate change challenges. So, what to do? Treasure Valley is now an integrated urban community. I was stunned to realize that between Mountain Home and Ontario, 900,000 people now live along the foothills. 900,000 people are basically your neighbors now. Environmental connections and political alliances that used to just water crops can be turned to other purposes. Those alliances need renovating so that climate change's challenges can be met in part by using environmental connections that are still here right now. The precious network of dams and canals can and should do more than deliver irrigation water. The desert south and east of town should be more than a place to go shoot cars and shoot bottles and drive ORVs. There's more to it than that. There's more value than that. This is Aldo Leopold, probably one of America's great conservation thinkers, writers, and activists in the 40 years before Rachel Carson of the early 60s. Leopold once said, part of the environmental ethic is seeing unlovely country through new eyes. In other words, looking at that ditch bank, which is really kind of utilitarian and kind of bland, and seeing it as a potential of something more. That country along the canal, that desert that stretches out past the prison, why can't the birds of prey area in the 21st century be for Treasure Valley what Bogus Basin was for Boise in the 1940s and 50s? A beacon beckoning people to travel from this river clear out to the verge of the Snake River. It could be a desert and canyonlands jewel that beckons you and your neighbors up and down the valley to explore the entire valley here. Those canals, they can generate energy as well as move water. and they can bookend the open space that you over the last 20 years have created up in the foothills here. It's not for me, the old boy come home again, to instruct you how to make this happen. I'm not going to be that kind of presumptuous guy. I am going to make some suggestions, though, about initiatives that could realize some of these opportunities, each of which and all together will help Boise be better positioned to confront the reality of climate change. First, the network of canals that web out from the river. There are at least 400, maybe 500 miles of canals in Ada County and the eastern part of Canyon County. If you've been in Denver, you probably recognize that the greater Denver area, once an irrigation capital, Queen City of the Plains, it used to be called, has turned most of its major canals and arterials into travel ways for feet and bicycles. You can go from Boulder to downtown Denver on a bike, or if you want to, you can walk. And throughout the greater Denver area, you can walk along hundreds of miles of canal bank that still deliver water, but they also give you an opportunity to enjoy everything about the Front Range that makes Denver such a spectacular area. I don't minimize the legal problems, looking at Will Whelan, connected with convincing canal companies and irrigation districts to make those paths available. But they are there and they are a resource. Secondly, the open space initiative that's transformed the foothills, there's really no good reason, except for money and politics, why that can't extend south and west, with Lake Lowell as its destination. Third, canals and solar energy. Many irrigation districts, especially in Central California and Arizona, have begun recognizing that these huge swaths of landscape are capable of generating more power than just delivering water. All of these things are possible, folks. Each of these things just requires the kind of creativity and initiative that folks like Frank Church and Cecil Andrus showed. Frank Church created a wilderness area by lobbying something through Congress 65 years ago. Cecil Andrus defined Idaho politics by reference to this obscure mountain called Castle Peak. There's no reason why Boiseans today can't be as thoughtful and as creative and as tough in figuring out coalition building as Senator Church and Cecil Andrus. After all, Boiseans have been making connections and solving problems now for about 160 years, and I have no doubt whatsoever that their ability, your ability to do that, is undiminished. So, edges and connections, environmental features in Boise environmental history. You live in a lucky place and you have amazing skills. Take advantage of those. Turn those to opportunities. Thanks so much. I look forward to your questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for that great talk.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
So Caitlin is going to be walking around. If you have a question, please raise your hand. She'll go ahead and grab those and bring them up to me. I have a couple of pieces of history to share with you.
Please.
So Castle Rock that you mentioned actually is now called Eagle Rock.
Is it really?
Yes,
I did
so
not
it
know
was
that.
actually changed officially maybe 15 years ago.
Oh, fantastic.
And the Shoshone Bannock come back annually and actually have a weekend celebration there. So I
Wonderful.
thought you'd find that interesting.
That's great.
In addition to that, the Plantation Golf Course that you mentioned is called the River Club.
Who
So
knew?
there you go.
I had no, see, I'm not
thought
an
you'd
old,
Find that interesting.
yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and start with a couple of questions that we had online, and I'm gonna lob a softball to you. And keep in mind that we have about 7 minutes before we'll close out the official meeting. But I have a feeling you're willing to stick around,
We'll stick
so we'll close it out officially. But we'll go ahead and ask. So softball is favorite memory from working at the EPA.
Oh gosh, favorite memory, the people I worked with. Your federal employees, many of whom might be your neighbors, your friends, your family members. America's asset that is undervalued and underappreciated. Their honesty, their dedication to their work, their creativity, their willingness to take a lot of crap from a lot of people to do the job right. I've never worked around a better group of people. That's my memory, is working with folks in Region 7 EPA and all over the agency, from Florida to Puerto Rico to Guam. Just the people I worked with. There are other proud things we did, but just the people, they were remarkable. Your folks are remarkable who work for EPA.
Yeah, thank you. So we have some questions here regarding specifically what's happened in Boise over the last let's say 2 decades, which you sort of referenced when you talked about the redistricting or the way that we've become a one-party state. And one of our audience members notes that basically we've become a preferred destination for climate migrants is what they call it. And so between that and the impact that that has environmentally, which hopefully you can comment on, but also talking about how environmental justice is really an important thing, even here in Boise. People don't recognize that there are major environmental justice issues here. How do you sort of merge the migrants that are coming here, driving up prices and that sort of thing, and the impact that that has with our environmental justice concerns that we have in this valley?
First off, environmental justice is and should be one of EPA's principal objectives. I know that President Biden and Administrator Reagan have said that we are about making sure that every American, no matter their zip code, education, race, ethnicity, or language, has the same opportunities to take advantage of and benefit from our environmental assets here. This is one of those kind of specific policy prescriptions where it's a little bit beyond me, but the whole principle of environmental justice is getting everybody around the table to make key decisions who are going to be impacted by those decisions. One thing that feels healthy about Boise is that the Boise city political system feels like it is capable of doing that and genuinely tries to do that. How to deal with folks who are coming here, escaping what they're leaving behind. I mean, all of us are climate migrants one way or another, whether physically or economically or culturally, all of us are changing how we live and where we live because of climate. That's just the simple reality. I'm convinced that somewhere working away in some of these buildings in Boise are people coming up with solutions, both economically and technologically, to some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think you've got something there. There's a number of people who want you to move back and run for governor. So, yeah, thought I'd throw that in there.
I am delighted to be married. And I intend to remain so.
A couple questions about our water resources in particular. So we have somebody who's definitely intrigued about the solar panels over canals and sort of what it takes to get that done. So maybe you know something about Arizona and California, and then sort of a different but along the same lines, what is the most important thing we can do to protect our water resources in this valley?
See the resources that have been constructed over the last 125 years, not as fixed, old-fashioned pieces of concrete and rock in the river, but see them as capable of generating new ideas and new changes. Who would have thought in 1965 that Lucky Peak Dam, at that point less than 10 years old, would ultimately create this kind of riverside environment from here all the way down the valley? These features are capable of doing more sometimes than we ask of them. Take it to heart. And also, I guess I remember, and again, there are lawyers in the crowd, water in Idaho is everybody's water. The Constitution is explicit about that. Every drop of water in this state, above or below the ground, belongs to every member of the state of Idaho. Don't delegate your connection to that water to something or somebody else. You have just as much right to be heard about it as somebody who uses it to make electricity down in Oregon or somebody who uses it to grow crops on the Snake River Valley. You're all invested in that water. It's your water just as much as people in Bingham County or Cassia County.
Want to comment at all about the solar panels over the
Oh,
canals?
yeah, sure. I can't say, people know I'm no engineer. I do know, though, that the canals, they basically don't have trees along them because trees make it harder to move water through those canals. Solar energy in a place like southwestern Idaho, which has wonderful solar capacity, would seem to me to be, at least on paper, a really good place to work with irrigation districts and with irrigation companies to generate some electricity out of this moving water. No reason it just has to do one thing or two things. That, you know, they seem to me to be almost a not no-brainer, but certainly a creative opportunity.
I think that's a good point. And I think if we think back about our history, a lot of the dams that were initially built were single purpose dams. And it wasn't until the 1930s that we started really thinking about ways to make those dams multi-purpose. So I think your point is historically significant
Right.
too.
I mean, there's no reason that a canal can't do at least three other things and just move water to crops.
Yeah, absolutely. In the interest of closing this out, I'll ask one last question, and that is, what takeaways do you think Boise's environmental history offers to cities outside of Idaho?
Appreciate your environmental resources. Think about your relationship and proximity to them. Boise is uniquely blessed, I think, because it is at the place where these three really distinct features come together. It's an ecotone, it's an edge environment. Those are the most productive places for any biological or botanical critter. See what's around you. I have students, when I taught environmental history, write an environmental history of their town. And a lot of kids from small towns in Kansas would go, I don't know if we have an environmental history. I go, God, of course you do. Every place on this map has an environmental history. Come to understand how you came to be, how the land and the water, the critters, and your relation to other places shape your community. So Boise's learned a lot about that. Lessons that Boise has learned have been very different. People did not expect some of the lessons they learned when they started off in one direction and ended up going in another.
I'm going to ask one last question before I close it out. And you've touched on it a little bit by saying you're not going to tell us how to do this, but I'm going to press you anyway. I think a lot of the audience members are curious about how you might get us back to a place that C. Sandris and Frank Church occupied, where there was political compromise, where there was civility. And if you have any recommendations, having served at the highest levels of government and at the State House, if you have any recommendations or thoughts on how to get back to that place.
Sure, I'll start from a strange place. I'll start with a Black labor union leader who lived in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., a guy named A. Philip Randolph. If you're ever in Union Station, D.C., the big, beautiful train station there on Capitol Hill, go find his statue. At the bottom of it, he has one of his favorite quotes, and it is, "The table of life in America isn't one you're invited to. You make your place at that table. Everything you get at that table, you fought for and you've earned." So start from the point of view that the principles and values that are serious to you, you're willing to stand up and defend. Abe Lincoln once said, "We can compromise on everything except the things we're not going to compromise about." And that is who we are. So stand firm on the principles that matter the most. That said, become active. You know, so many, I think, elected officials are only hearing from what I'll call sort of stovepipes of information, amplified stovepipes of information. Make sure that folks who have the privilege of representing you at any level of government hear from you, hear from your neighbors. Make sure that they think of alternatives. And I guess I'd close with this too. We look back maybe on those black and white photos of the 50s and young C. Sandris, 1969, 70, think, oh, things must have been so much simpler then. Frank Church runs for Senate in the middle of McCarthyism. He first announces he's going to try to be a senator in 1954. That's the year that Joe McCarthy has essentially terrorized the President of the United States and the Congress of the United States. Those were difficult, divisive times then. C. Sandris in 1969, 70, I mean, this was still a one-party state, and some guy from Orofino decides to come and run for governor. It's like, hey, I think we can be better and do better. There are people out there capable of being those kinds of leaders. All of us are capable of being those kinds of leaders or supporting those who have whatever, the drive, the desire, the innovation, who want to get into it and go toe-to-toe with somebody. I've become more like my mentor, Don Worster, who is kind of a grim figure. But I talked to Don the other day. He lives in Corvallis, Oregon. He's 87 years old. And he said, you know, surprisingly, I'm so much more optimistic now because ultimately the human animal is a learning animal. We learn, we change, we apply new knowledge, we generate new knowledge, and we make better decisions when we learn. So I'm going to follow Don Worster. Keep learning, change your ideas, pick up new information, and don't stop thinking about new ways to solve problems because they're out there. I guess with that,
Thank you so much,
thanks so much,
Karl.
folks. Thanks all to you.